Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to consider engaging stakeholders and what the role is of the governing board. This has been a really important conversation that we've been having with you all over the last year. So just to begin, in case some of you have not attended our webinars before, they're actually much more like 30-minute lectures. We're not trying to be interactive. We're not providing a network here. That's something that other events do for our members. But if you do have questions or comments via the chat function, then please do put those in and we will get back to you after the webinar. You will be muted and you will be sent the slides along with the links to the resources that I cover, but also in one case, because we are aware that some of you aren't members and we've got a new membership resource being published today on the back of this webinar, so we will actually attach it so that you all can read it whether or not you are members. And you may well know we do record these and then we put them up on our website for everyone to be able to use at any point. So if you haven't been to others, then do have a look at that page and see what else we have been talking about over the past 18 months. And lastly on this slide, I'd just like to start by thanking you for what you do for your pupils and your communities. I know that it is our day job here at NGA to support you and provide you with what you need, but it never ceases to amaze me the amount of time and thought and care that you all put into this work. And NGA is absolutely on a mission to make sure that other people in the sector know about this role, but also that others outside the sector know that it's possible for them to volunteer. So in the next half hour, this is going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour. First of all, making the case for why this is important. And I think some of you who have signed up will already be in agreement with that. And that's why you've joined me today. But then to look at both how we can inculcate stakeholder engagement as part of core governance practice, how it can actually make a difference when you're taking decisions, making decisions, what you might do as opposed to the school leaders or indeed other members of staff. And then towards the end, we've got some questions that you might want to take away and ask. So let's start by going back to the fundamentals of what governance is. So governance determines who has the power, who make the decisions, how other players make their voices heard, and how account is rendered. So do you see that part of other players, the phrase is used here rather than stakeholders, make their voices heard? It's absolutely part and parcel of what governance is about. In order to govern well, in order to make those decisions well, in order to exercise your power well, you need to know what other people think and what other people have experienced. And lastly, it's about holding to account. Yes, of course, the board holds the senior leaders to account, but you yourselves as governing boards are part of the accountability system. You're part of the way in which schools are held to account, or in this case, the language is account is rendered back to the communities, back to the parent body, back to the pupil body. So it isn't a sort of optional add-on. It's fundamental to doing this job well. I'm not going to talk at great length about are basic building blocks of good governance, because in fact I did another one of these webinars at the beginning of the year on that. So if I can refer you back to that one if you're not familiar with it. But I just wanted to point out here that actually one of those 3 pillars of that good governance temple is accountability and listening to stakeholders. So a different way really of making that same point. We're not asking you to do something additional. We're asking you to make this activity part and parcel of how you exercise your core functions. So you may know that NGA for a few years now has been recognising ensuring the voices of stakeholders are heard as a 4th core function. But really, that is to make sure that those other 3 core functions that you'll be aware of from, I'm sure, other training you've done, from the DFE governance handbook, make sure that those core functions are exercised well. So it's about using stakeholder voice to influence the values, the vision, the ethos, your strategic priorities, making sure that stakeholder voice helps you challenge school leaders from an informed point of view, and indeed listening to views and experience when you're undertaking that 3rd core function, which I'm sure you know, is about how you use your resources well. Where do you put your money? Where do you put your people? We have a fairly standard list of stakeholders that we're using, parents, pupils, staff, the broader community, and also employers. Today, I probably won't have much time to talk about employers or even the wider community. That seems like quite a long list. So let's start with those 3 absolutely core groups: parents, pupils, and staff. But another very good reason for engaging with stakeholders is to make sure that the work that you do is visible. Are you visible to those different stakeholders? If they don't understand what your role is, they won't really understand the conversations that they can have with you, or how that might make a difference. And you really do want those conversations to be absolutely relevant and appropriate. So this is a bit of a win-win. We hope that in what we're calling our year of visible governance, by you going into schools, talking to, whether that be the pupils at assemblies, now that perhaps you can get it in and do that, let's not worry today about whether those rules around COVID safety will be changing. But if you are able to go into school to talk to pupils at assembly, explain what you do, begin that dialogue, or indeed the same with the parents' body, you can do that in all sorts of different ways, and we've got a lot of resources on our website. But really, none of that is rocket science. It's about using newsletters, using occasions, putting information out there, but very much with the idea that actually people can come back to you too. For example, are you and your photographs up in reception in the school? Do people literally know what you look like? I wanted to start by thinking about a little bit about who does what. So if this audience is similar to our usual NGA audiences, half of you will be governing in multi-academy trusts, some of you at the trustee board level, and some of you at the school level, whether you call that an academy committee or an LGB. So it's important to think about the trust board's responsibility for the overarching culture and ethos and practice in terms of listening to stakeholders? Does everybody buy in to the fact that this is an important part of what the schools within the trust do? And trustees yourselves, depends a bit on the size and the geography of your trust. It may simply not be feasible for you to visit academies, for you to meet stakeholders directly, and therefore you will be relying very heavily on those who govern at school level. And actually that's what we're seeing. All our work with multi-academy trusts is showing that increasingly year on year, trustees are valuing that information that those that govern at academies bring them, and academy level governors are saying to us that the trustees and the executives are valuing their voices more. There are also some MATs that have the capacity to actually appoint trust-wide members of staff who engage with the community, who their day job is to listen to stakeholders and help that happen. It's unlikely that single schools will have the funding, the capacity to do that themselves, but we'd be really interested to hear if that is the case. Obviously, we're aware of family engagement workers, but often the reason for them engaging is pastoral. Whereas what I'm talking to you today about is how the board engages in order to inform your own work. So absolutely, at the top of the list is engaging with stakeholders when you are developing your strategy. Indeed, at any point in that cycle, whether it's creating it, monitoring it, reviewing it, that is a time when it is good to be asking the different stakeholders about their views. How does it feel to them? You may feel that what you've put on your strategy document makes an awful lot of sense, but it is that actually being realized at school and at home. So for those of you that aren't aware of our Being Strategic guidance, that is downloadable by everyone, whether you're members or not of NGA, and it's also produced in cooperation with the school leader organisations. So in order for you to make those good decisions, you ideally should be having 3 sources of information. I know that's a bit of a tall order for every single decision that comes before you, but it's a good principle to aspire to. And there I just wanted to separate out the difference between those of you working in single standalone schools or within MATs and those who are on the board of trustees. So in single schools, as well as hearing directly from your head teacher and other members of SLT, you would expect to have reports from what we've called trusted third parties and stakeholders. And then thirdly, you will also see and hear things yourselves, and that's perfectly legitimate information to triangulate against those other reports. Whereas, as you can see, if you're a trustee of a MAT, you will often need to be relying on the information that comes from the Academy Committee rather than you necessarily seeing it all yourself. So that's the principle of it. But let's talk a little bit more now about the how you might be able to do it. I've already spoken a little bit about strategy, so I'm going to leave that there for now. But I think it's one of the things that you could do in the coming year is actually to have within your strategy document the idea that establishing a culture and indeed practice of effective engagement will be one of your priorities for the coming year. And if the trust or school were to do that, you would want to do it, I'm sure, for all reasons, not limit yourself just to the making the good decisions at governing board level. The reason I mention that is because there is a huge body of literature and indeed practice about engaging parents in order to improve pupils' learning. That's incredibly important that it's being done, but that obviously is done by the school staff and not by yourselves. But if you've got that culture of effective engagement, it also then allows you to monitor both what's being given to you in order that you improve your own decision making, but also what the staff are doing in order to be able to directly improve pupil learning. So what could you do? And a lot of you do that. I'm going to flash up the results from our annual governance survey any moment now. But clearly, one of the things that you can do is invite others to present to the board. Doesn't always have to be your senior leadership team. Some of you do invite student council to come, to other members of staff to come and talk to you about a particular topic. And that's absolutely up to you, depending what your agenda is, who might be relevant to present directly to the board. You also might want to actually undertake engagement activities yourselves, or at least some of you may want to do that, remembering that you are a team, as many of you as possible. It's great if you can get to know your school in this way, get to know your stakeholders in this way. But I do remember a conversation with a senior civil servant who was a governor, and he said actually because of the role of his job, he made absolutely sure he prepared very thoroughly for meetings, but he was aware he couldn't take time to visit the school, but other members of the team did do that. So any of these activities that you carry out clearly have to be reported back to the school. You will all, I'm sure, have a visits policy. We do have guidance on visits to schools. And while you're there may well be informal discussions that you want to take note of and include in your visit report. You also maybe, or one or two of you may be regularly attending various forums and councils, might be your parents forum, might be your student council, it might be a meeting with the staff team. And sometimes that might be a standing an arrangement, and other times it may be you just want to come into school to listen to a certain group of people on a very specific issue that you are monitoring. You may want to jump on the back of other activities that are happening in school anyway. And I do know we've had a very useful conversation with a number of you who had really made advances on using your parents' evenings pre-COVID to carry out engagement activities, some incredibly successfully, with posters and post-it notes or surveys on tablets. And of course, with a lot of parent evening, or all parents' evenings probably last year, going virtual, that might continue this year for many of you. I think they've gone down incredibly well, both with staff and parents. So that does mean then reviewing how you can carry out those activities. Are there other events at which you can turn up and can engage directly with parents who are already at school? So this is just when you thought you'd got it absolutely sorted, something changes, doesn't it? School governance is phenomenally dynamic. So in the same way that we sort of coined the phrase many years ago about visiting with a purpose, I've just highlighted here sort of engagement with a purpose. Occasionally, an off-the-cuff conversation while you're in school may spark something that you can take back to the board and expand on and consider whether you need to know more about something. But generally, if you as a board are planning to undertake an engagement activity yourself, you really need to be absolutely clear what it is you're trying to achieve from that. And I'm going to come back in a moment and look at some of the challenges around that. But I've also mentioned already how you will want to be monitoring how the school or trust engages over a whole range of areas. What structures and arrangements are in place for meaningful engagement. Actually, not just parents. I'm afraid my bullet points have gone slightly out of sync there. And lastly, you will want to consider the results of your annual surveys. I think a few years ago, people almost thought, oh, we've ticked the stakeholder engagement box because we've carried out a survey. But that's very much just part of the mechanism, almost the backdrop of what you're doing, an annual survey. What happens as a result of that? There is nothing more likely to reduce your response rates in future years if actually people do engage and find that nothing happens as a result, or they do not hear anything. So you may hear X from a group of stakeholders. It's more likely actually that you hear X and Y and Z, isn't it? Because here am I talking about, you know, the parent body as though they have a view, and they don't, do they? They have as many views as anyone else. It's you will get a range of views, a diversity of views. You will need to take that into your decision making. And it may well be that actually the majority view doesn't prevail in terms of what you decide. And that's absolutely legitimate. But then there is an explanation, isn't there, that needs to come after that in terms of saying, look, you said that, some people said this, the reason we made this decision was that. So here on this slide, you can see the results of our last two annual surveys. And we purposefully kept the 2020 the results in, not just because we like a little bit of longitudinal data, but also the 2020 results were looking back on a year that was largely pre-COVID. Whereas obviously in 2021, COVID absolutely prevented people doing some of what they would normally do in a usual school year. We no longer really have usual school years, do we? And some of those activities have moved virtually. So, for example, that statistic there about meeting with or observing your pupil council, 21% of you still did that in 2021, despite everything else. I imagine that was likely to be a remote meeting. And similarly, some of you did actually consult with staff, and that's even gone up a little bit. But generally, even pre-COVID, we haven't got to a situation where all of governing boards are sort of regularly and routinely engaging with those sort of three principal stakeholders, parents, pupils, and staff. So I would really encourage those of you who haven't been able to sort of take that one step up and think, right, what is our strategy going to be on this? And there you can see there the point I was making about attending parents' evenings. You did tell us about the things that you were limited on, and clearly that did crash during COVID times. We also did have lots of comments. Thank you so very much to those of you who contributed about things that you have done. I'm not going to read all these out, but when you do get the slides, clearly you'll have them to hand. But one of the things I did just want to mention is the fact that there have been many more letters, I think, sent out to staff thanking them for their contributions over these last 18 months. And although I'm very much pushing engagement in terms of listening to people and taking their views on board in terms of setting strategy and making decisions, that communication out from the governing board is also really crucial. And I'm influenced by some really inspirational people. Many of you will have heard of, I'm sure, Professor Tim Brighouse, who really pushes the idea of handwritten notes. And it's something that he did over the years, working with schools in all sorts of different ways, is to follow up visits with handwritten notes to, in his case, usually head teachers, but sometimes teachers. But also some of you will remember Estelle Morris, probably one of the only Secretary of States for Education who resigned because she didn't think she was doing a good enough job. She had started as a teacher, and when she speaks from a platform, she talks about how important it was to her as a young teacher to understand what the governing body was doing, but also when the governing body actually, or it must have been, I imagine it was a single governor, possibly the chair of governors, did actually happen to get in touch with her in her first year of teaching, just saying, how are things for you? The fact that she was visible to them, she said, was incredibly important to her and made her feel valued. And I think perhaps she's been a real champion of governing boards, and I think that early experience probably helped mold that. So I'm conscious of time, and I'm not going to go through each of these slides, or I will run over something dreadful. But I have made many of these points in my preamble. But one of the things I really wanted to reiterate was that the relationships that you as a governing board or senior leaders are developing with the parent body are incredibly important in terms of, setting you in good stead in the future. Sort of building that trust can have huge amount of dividends right across the school, and including in terms of pupils' learning. And I just wanted to drop one thing into the conversation here, which might sound trivial, but it's really important to think about what might bring people to engage with a school, particularly if they're people that haven't had great experiences of school themselves. And this is a tip that's come not just from examples of schools, but examples with community engagement more generally, is that food has a role to play. People want to feel welcomed. They want to feel that they belong. And actually, food is an important indicator of that for people. So we've got some fabulous examples where actually inviting parents in to share food while having a conversation with them more broadly about the school has really made a difference. Pupil voice is, I should say about the parental engagement, we are currently in the process of improving and adding to our guidance on parental engagement, but it is, we do already have some on our website, which is produced jointly with parents, parent kind. So please do have a look at that, and we'll make sure the link is sent out to you. But if there's anything you want to see added, now is the perfect time, because we're just fine-tuning that so that it'll be ready for our annual conference next month. And you will also hear at the annual conference quite a bit more about some of the issues that have come up to us through your pupil voice. Particularly, we've got doing quite a bit of work at the moment about environmental sustainability, which all very topical with COP 26. But more generally, pupil voice is an area that we are going to be publishing on in the new year. But for today, I wanted to finish with a big plug for staff engagement. I mean, clearly, not only is it the right thing to do to listen to what staff have to say about the school, nobody will know more about what is happening on a day-to-day basis, about the culture. How does the school feel to them? But also, you are either the employer of those staff, or you are, if you're in a community school, in lieu of the employer. So you really have a role there in making sure that you are a good employer. So that's a sort of, second reason to make sure that you are engaging with your staff in a way that is appropriate. So I'm really pleased to say that today in By Design, we have published new guidance looking at the ways in which you can engage with your governing boards in order to fulfill both those employer responsibilities, but also the stakeholder engagement responsibilities. So please, in this year when we've been very much, as I know you have, thinking about producing resources on staff development, on staff well-being, then this is an important addition, I think, to that piece of work, and really sort of interleave with those. You might have put more resources into staff development, but are they paying dividends? What can your staff tell you about what that CPD was like? Community more broadly is also an area where I think you will be wanting to establish productive relationships, but I'm going to leave that for another day, and instead finish with encouraging you, if you haven't thought about stakeholder engagement in the round, to put some time aside to think about how you do that. What should be regular engagement? What should be one-off? When you're communicating out, when you're listening back, what works? What has made a difference? And I particularly encourage you to think about those people that don't automatically jump up and want to be heard. Some of us are built like that. I think, when I was lower down the staff tree, I still very much wanted my voice to be heard. And I remember another member of the team saying, "I'm so glad you do that, Emma, because I wouldn't be brave enough to do that." But we need to make sure that the quieter parents, the quieter children are heard as well. So really give thought to that. Are you always listening to the same people? And I think when it comes to pupil voice, often it is the very articulate children who understandably put themselves forward to be spokespeople for others. But there will be times when you want to speak to those children that may have the challenges themselves. I was at the Norfolk Governors Conference very recently, and they had some really great work that they were doing that was being done in Norfolk with young carers, listening to the voice of young carers. You may, when you're looking at your pupil premium statement, you may want to speak to some of the young people in receipt of pupil premium. Similarly with SEND, how do you engage with parents of SEND pupils? We're also aware, obviously, that there's age-appropriate activities, both in terms of younger children and older children, but actually with parents, it's often easier for primary schools to engage with parents who are about the school than it is for secondary schools. So I've left you there with some questions that you might want to take away to begin the conversation with others. And I would also really like to heartily recommend our bite-size e-learning on this topic, again, for a way for the whole board to come together. Almost half of schools and trusts across England now buy into Learning Link. So it's over 10,000 schools. Any moment now, I'll be able to say, hooray, it's actually 50% of schools. But our bite-sized modules, which means they're only 10 to 15 minutes, have been particularly well used, and you can use them together at a board meeting. So you could start your board meeting going through the Learning Link module together and using that as the starter of your conversation. So there are a couple more resources that we are planning, and Nina Sharma, our Senior Policy and Information Officer, has given me permission to advertise her email to you. So if there's anything you want to ask, get in touch and we'll make sure our resources reflect that. But also, I know, because of the nature of our membership, that some of you listening to this will have done fabulous things. Or you will have done things that you thought were going to be fabulous but didn't quite work out quite right, and that's where some of the best learning comes from. So please, if you've got any experience you're happy to share with us, then let Nina know. So there we've got some of our upcoming events over the next half term, and I particularly want to mention the fact that our annual conference, I'm pleased to say the Secretary of State for Education, Nadeem Zahawi, is coming to speak to you. I'm so pleased about that in terms of governance being visible. Not every Secretary of State comes to NGA's annual conference, but the new Secretary of State is. So I do hope, actually there's only a few places there, by the way, but I do hope I will actually see some of you face to face shortly. So thank you so much for joining me today. I know engaging with stakeholders is not an easy thing. It's so much easier for me to talk about it than it is for you all to design and undertake it and discuss it with your senior leaders. But I do hope that might have given you some food for thought. Thank you.